You are listening to The Vocal Technologist. Spoken tech for your ears.
If you feel like you just blinked and the entire world of product design has, I don't know, completely changed, you're not alone.
Not at all.
I mean, the field is moving so fast. We're talking about everything from hardware decisions to these massive branding failures, and then all this wild, cutting-edge generative tech.
And that speed is exactly why we need to pause for a second. Our whole mission today is to look at the materials we've gathered on these shifts and pull out the actual lessons.
Okay, so what are we focused on?
How brands are handling this new level of public scrutiny, what a designer's actual job is when a machine can do the visuals, and how AI is, well, how it's really changing the craft itself.
We're covering a lot of ground. We're starting with something surprisingly rigid, the color choice for Apple's AirPods.
The famous white.
Exactly. Then we'll get into why 2025 was just a graveyard for some really big rebrands, and we'll end with how to stop something called alarm fatigue. It's a real mix of strategy and some fascinating tech.
It is. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with a product everyone has seen, but maybe not really thought about, AirPods. It's almost impossible to imagine them being any color other than that glossy white. It's their thing, right?
It's globally iconic now, a silent signal that you're in the Apple ecosystem. But what's so fascinating here is that this wasn't an accident. That choice was a huge internal debate. It was deliberate strategy.
That's the real story. I mean, leaked prototypes of the very first ones showed Apple was seriously testing out bright pink and yellow.
Right, to match the whole iPhone 5C look and feel.
Exactly. They were clearly thinking about personalization, about variety.
And yet they pulled back. They chose that consistent all-white design for the standard AirPods and the Pros, and that decision really prioritized a single recognizable identity over everything else.
So it was about creating an instant visual signature in a market that was getting really crowded.
Precisely. They introduced colors later with the big over-ear AirPods Max, but the core product, the one you see everywhere,
Is still that consistent white. It proves that for Apple, their visual DNA is just a higher priority.
yeah,
And that kind of consistency, that refinement, is actually what saved other brands, like Kettle Chips.
absolutely. Their strategy was all about refinement, not reinvention. You mentioned turbulent years, and in 2025, so many brands tried to jump ahead by just blowing up their identity.
Right.
Kettle's goal wasn't to look totally new. It was to modernize the craft cues and strengthen the premium feel while keeping that trusted sort of artisan DNA they already had.
But isn't there a risk there? If you only make small changes, aren't you maybe missing out on a younger audience? How do you know where that line is between being safe and just being stagnant?
That's the critical tension. And Kettle really nailed it. They didn't just tweak a logo. They invested in new photography and material textures, typography,
Yeah.
all things that leaned into the authenticity they already owned.
So they weren't chasing trends.
No, they were cementing their value. They balanced that subtle evolution with, real cultural meaning.
Meanwhile, anyone who got that balance wrong in 2025, it was a perilous year.
Oh, it was intense. The material we looked at showed just how quickly public opinion can turn into, well, strategic debt. The backlash on social media was so fast that huge brands, we're talking Cracker Barrel, even McDonald's, had to completely reverse their redesign.
Within weeks, right?
Yeah, within weeks of launch. It shows you that designers almost have to be cultural seismologists now, not just visual artists. Public reaction is a real strategic factor. You might have to plan a full retreat.
If you don't signal authenticity, or if you break that emotional bond people have with your look.
The public will tear it down instantly.
And what this volatility means for, say, 2026 is so interesting. We're moving away from those really rigid, minimal logos that can feel a bit cheap
Yeah,
when they miss the mark.
definitely. We're seeing a really powerful trend toward flexible, responsive identity systems. Logos and visual languages that are more playful, dimensional, tactile. They adapt, they change depending on where you see them, from a tiny screen to a huge billboard. They're not just one static image anymore.
Can you give me a quick example? Like, what does that actually look like?
Okay, so think of a logo that uses variable typography. The weight of the letters might get thicker or thinner depending on the screen size. Or systems that have these dynamic patterns in the negative space, so it feels less like a static stamp and more like a fluid language.
It's all about depth over corporate flatness.
Exactly. And sometimes the response to that flatness is just pure mischief. We have to quickly mention the design trolling that happened in 2025.
The unofficial Trump Kennedy Center logo.
A masterpiece. Someone anticipated the Kennedy Center might get renamed and just preemptively registered the domain. It's a funny but powerful reminder that design and culture are just so deeply intertwined.
And that proves design isn't just about making things pretty anymore. It's about strategic intent. So, if AI can handle the visuals, we have to shift the conversation to the thinking behind it all. What is the core value of a human designer now?
That is the essential question. Because design is so much more than code execution. The risk with all these new tools is that we start to devalue the most important contribution, defining the problem, the intent, the vision.
So if you skip the thinking part, because making it so easy, you just get, what, a well-built bad idea.
Exactly. Products that are efficient to build but poorly considered. The why has to come before the how. Otherwise, the machine just builds a perfect version of the wrong thing.
Which sounds like designers need to think bigger than just one screen or one component.
But that's it. That's where systems thinking becomes so crucial. You have to move beyond isolated tasks, like designing one button, and start to see the product as this big interconnected ecosystem.
Give me an example of how that pays off.
A designer who isn't a systems thinker might just optimize one feature to be super fast. A systems thinker, though, they consider how that feature impacts, say, long-term maintenance, or the training the support team needs, or even inventory if it connects to a physical product. They're thinking about resilience, not just pixels.
But that strategic thinking creates a problem internally, something we saw mentioned, the loss of craft. In a lot of big companies, leaders are pushed to be purely strategic, which means they're not in the weeds anymore, not doing hands-on work.
And if the leaders aren't teaching, how do the junior designers learn? They miss the nuances of production quality, of what's technically possible, all the messy details. It creates a real knowledge gap.
The solution that was proposed is something called jamming.
Yeah, jamming basically just means leaders need to do hands-on collaboration. They get close to the work, but they don't control it. They're there to teach craft, to mentor, and to help raise the quality overall. You have to mentor through action.
This ties right into where a lot of designers are learning now. We all scroll through platforms like Dribbble, but it gets a lot of criticism for teaching designers to just optimize for that one perfect, pixel-perfect screenshot.
It's the difference between art and engineering, really. Those beautiful portfolio pieces, they almost never show you how to handle, really long usernames or what an empty screen should look like or the limits of old code.
Right. We've all designed something beautiful that falls apart with real data.
True proficiency comes from studying products that have actually shipped. It's a hard truth.
And let's look at a critical place where this thinking matters, designing alerts. User attention is a scarce resource, and good alert design is all about managing that scarcity.
You have to distinguish between alarms, which mean act now, and anomalies, which are just an invitation to investigate.
If everything is screaming at me, I'm just going to tune it all out.
Exactly. There's actually a principle for this, the Yerkes-Dodson law from psychology. It shows that both too little and too much stimulation will tank your performance. When everything seems urgent, users get what's called alarm fatigue.
And what's a real-world scenario where that's just catastrophic?
Think about a hospital monitoring system. If the system alerts a nurse for every tiny, non-critical change, a slight dip in a patient's oxygen, a flicker in voltage, that nurse becomes desensitized. So when the real alarm goes off, the critical event.
They're slower to react, or they might even dismiss it.
Right. So prioritization isn't a nice to have, it's mandatory for safety.
And speaking of mandatory choices, accessibility is another one. Designing for deaf and hard of hearing users means you have to acknowledge it's a huge spectrum, not just one condition.
Which forces you to use multiple modes of communication, text, captions, haptics, visuals. It's not a checklist, it's a core design choice that actually makes the product better for everyone.
Okay, now let's pivot to the absolute cutting edge. The new landscape of possibility being created by generative tools. First up, a huge win for consistency. Google Sans Flex.
This is a really big deal. Google Sans is their brand font, and it has all these advanced variable features, weight, grade, optical size, that were only available internally. Now they've put it on Google Fonts for everyone.
So they're basically democratizing high-level typography.
They absolutely are. It gives smaller studios and individual designers access to the kind of complex, adaptable tools that used to be reserved for the biggest brands in the world.
And speaking of standardizing, another thing we saw highlighted was the growing importance of design tokens.
If you're building anything complex, you need to know about tokens. Think of them as a shared vocabulary for design. They're basically named placeholders for things like color values or typography scales.
And the benefit is,
Designers and developers both use the name, not the specific hex code, so it makes everything more consistent. And if the brand changes, you just change the token value once and it updates everywhere. It's the infrastructure that makes complex design scalable.
that consistency is finally starting to show up in the generative models too. These tools are advancing at an alarming rate.
They are. A model like Qwen Image Edit 2511 is making huge strides in consistency, which was the big problem last year. We're seeing it hold characters together better in a single image, and it can do what are called identity-preserving edits.
Identity-preserving edits. What does that actually let a designer do?
It means you can generate a complex design, say a new piece of hardware, and then you can change the material from matte plastic to brushed aluminum without changing the shape or the lighting. It lets you iterate on concepts incredibly fast.
But the breakthroughs aren't just visual.
Not at all. The Qwen 3 TTS family is doing amazing things with voice. You can now use natural language, just type instructions, to control the timbre, prosody, and emotion in generated speech.
Wait, really? I can just type, say this with a tone of cautious optimism, and
Yeah.
the model does it.
Yes. And another model can do 3-second voice cloning across 10 different languages. The expressiveness is becoming so human-like. This is the vocal technologist moment for the next generation. We're moving beyond screens into designing complex audio experiences.
So we're not just generating static assets anymore. We're generating entire interactive environments.
Which is the most exciting development, and it connects directly to A2UI. This is a protocol that lets AI agents generate rich, interactive user interfaces that work natively on web, mobile, desktop, everywhere.
Why is that a big deal? Don't we already have AIs that can code UIs?
The key is that it does this without executing arbitrary code. It uses a declarative protocol. It's a huge step toward making AI agents safer and more functional because it constrains them to standardized, known safe UI components.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. If you look back, the really transformative software, it always seems to pop up when new technology creates this landscape of possibility, like Photoshop 1.0.
Written by one person, just experimenting. It wasn't some big corporate plan.
Exactly. It was discovery. And generative AI feels like that kind of inflection point. Our current tools, chatbots and simple code assistants, they might seem as quaint as DOS in a few years.
I think so. Paradigm shifts aren't predicted in boardrooms. They're discovered by small teams breaking old constraints.
So if A2UI is the new scaffolding, what's the constraint we need to break to find the Photoshop 1.0 of this era?
I think we need to break the constraint that design has to start with a visual. The next Photoshop won't be about manipulating images. It'll be about manipulating intent. Allowing a designer to define complex systems, outcomes, emotional states, and then have the system generate the entire resilient artifact from that high-level intent.
Wow. So that product is probably being built right now.
I'd bet on it.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the strategic refinement we saw with kettle chips to the focus required to avoid alarm fatigue and these transformative tools like Qwen and A2UI. The big takeaway for me is that UX is moving away from just screens. It's becoming about systems thinking, about deep strategy.
And as we think about that future, I want to leave you with one final thought. It connects all this digital innovation back to the physical world. The materials we looked at had these incredible projects focused on sustainable materials.
Like truly wild stuff.
Exactly. Think about a fungi-based prosthetic organ that's designed to literally digest microplastics inside the body, or microalgae pigments that can create sustainable color.
Okay.
So if the next generation of physical products are being designed to actively consume environmental harm to clean the world, what does that mean for the longevity and the ethical mandate of the digital products we're building today? How do we design experiences that contribute to well-being instead of just consuming attention? That, I think, is the compelling question for every designer working in 2026.
Spoken Tech for your ears.